This question appeared on a video about working with files and folders in Excel VBA, and what Jojo wants to do is copy a bunch of PDF files to a new location, but the problem is he only has partial folder names to work with, so he can't reference the complete folder path. We've got a few options for how to solve this problem. I'll talk you through a couple of the basic ones in this video. And I've started with a brand new blank Excel workbook, which I have saved as a macro-enabled file, and I've popped that all by itself in its own separate folder. To get started with the code, I'll head into the Visual Basic Editor, and then I can insert a new module. And we're going to be referencing the Microsoft Scripting Runtime library for quite a lot of the examples in this video. So while I'm here, I'm going to head up to the Tools menu and choose References. And then I'll scroll down through the list to find the Microsoft Scripting Runtime. There it is, and I'll place a check in the box next to that. And then when I click OK, I've now got access to a bunch of really useful classes that I can use to make working with files and folders a lot easier. I'm going to be using a particular class quite a lot in several examples here, so to avoid having to declare the same variable lots of times in lots of different subroutines, I'll take the opportunity to declare a private module level variable, which I'm going to call FSO, as a new scripting.FileSystemObject. So that'll be an auto-instancing variable whenever I reference the variable name FSO in my other subroutines. If an instance of that class doesn't already exist, VBA will create one for me automatically. The first subroutine I'm going to write is going to get a reference to a folder whose full path I already know. So I'm going to say something like sub GetFolder ref FSO. In here, I'm going to declare a variable called FOL as a scripting.folder. And then I can say set FOL equals fso.getFolder. Now this requires me to know the path of the folder whose reference I want to get, so that's nice and easy, C:// and then the name of the folder I'm interested in is Wise Owl. So I can type that in some double quotes and some round brackets. And once I've successfully retrieved a reference to that object, I can print some useful information about it. Well, I say useful information, it's actually information I already know. I want to print out the folder's name, and I want to print out the folder's path. Having done that, I can run that subroutine, and I should find that the information about the Wise Owl folder name and Wise Owl folder path appears in the immediate window. We can do something similar to get just the name of a folder without having to use the Scripting Runtime library at all. Let's have a new subroutine. I'm going to call this one GetFolder Name, and I'll add the word dir, short for directory, to the end of that subroutine name, and that's the name of the function we're going to use. I'm going to say debug.print and then look for the directory function or the dir function in this list. If I open some parentheses, there are two optional parameters. The first one is the name of the path to the folder or the file that you want to return the name of. So I can say C://wiseowl. And then if I want to specify that this is a folder or a directory rather than a type of file, I need to select VB directory for the second parameter. Once I've done that, I can close the parentheses at the end, and then when I run that subroutine, it simply returns the folder name to the immediate window. Now, there are quite a few differences in the way these techniques work, and one of those differences is what happens when the folder can't be found. If I take away the word owl from the getFolder method, when I run that subroutine, it fails with the runtime error message path not found, and it's fairly obvious which line will have failed if I click debug. I'll hit the reset button, and then if I do the same thing with the directory function or the dir function, when I run that one, we don't get a runtime error. The directory function simply returns an empty string when the directory can't be found. So if I click into the immediate window, I should see that there's an extra blank line here that's been printed out when I executed that subroutine. This means that we need slightly different techniques to choose what to do if our folder can't be found. With the directory function, it's fairly straightforward. We can just check if the directory function returns an empty string. So we could say if, and then I'll just copy that function. And then I want to check if it does not return an empty string, then I'd like to print out the name of that folder. I'll add an else clause just so we can see something happening. I'll say debug.print folder not found, and then end if. And then if we run that subroutine now, we'll see that we get folder not found printed out into the immediate window. With the GetFolder method, we have a couple of choices. Because it generates a runtime error, we could use an onError statement above this line. We could say onError, go to, and then redirect our code to a different section. We could also say resume next, I suppose, to ignore the error entirely. We've got a few choices. A slightly more convenient technique to use just for this video is to use the folder exists method of the FileSystemObject class. So I could check before this line, I could say if fso.folder exists, and then I want to just check for the existence of the same folder that I'm trying to get a reference to. So that's a Boolean function, it returns true or false, and if it returns true, I want to set a reference to that folder and then print out its name. Otherwise, I'll do the same thing I did down here, debug.print folder not found. So when I run this subroutine again now, I'll see another message which says folder not found. One other thing that it's probably worth knowing is that you don't always have to include the full path to the folder whose name you're looking for. Just to demonstrate that, I'm going to make a couple of changes to my scripting runtime example up here. I'm going to take away the C:\/ and then put in the full folder name that I'm looking for. And I'll do that in both places. Now, of course, this isn't going to work. If I run this one, it returns folder not found, even though I know that that folder name does exist. The reason it returns folder not found is because if you don't specify the directory in which this folder name sits, then by default, VBA uses the current directory. If you look for the current directory, or if you want to look for the current directory, you can use the curdir function, current directory function. And when I type that into the immediate window, following a question mark, it tells me the current directory that's being used by Excel. Now, it's also possible to change the current directory. So in this same subroutine before my if statement, I'm going to use the chdir function, change directory function, and I'm going to change the current directory so that it's looking at C:\\. If I just clear the contents of the immediate window at that point and then run that subroutine, we'll see that even though I haven't provided the full path to that folder, I've only provided its name, it has found it and it has printed out those details. I can do the same thing with the directory function as well. I don't need to provide the full folder path, I can just provide the name of the folder. So if I change this now to take away the C:\/ and then put the word owl back into the directory name, I don't need to change the directory again. The current directory has already been changed in my previous subroutine. If I run this one, it prints out the folder name. Of course, in reality, if I weren't using both subroutines, I'd want to make sure that this one had changed its directory to C:\/ first. So I'd include that line in this subroutine as well, so that I can find that folder name without having to worry about what the current directory is. Now on to the point of the original question. How do we do this when we don't have a full folder name to search for? Sorry it took so long to get to this point. With the directory function, what we can do is use wildcard characters in the name of the folder we're searching for. So rather than searching for this specific folder wise owl, I could say wise followed by an asterisk character. The asterisk represents any number of characters, including no characters at all. So if I place this in both locations, I can say wise asterisk in both places. If I just clear the contents of the immediate window again and then run that subroutine, you'll see that it does indeed print out the first folder it finds which matches that pattern. Now unfortunately we can't use the same technique with the folder exists and GetFolder methods of the scripting runtime library. Wildcard characters simply aren't supported. If I try to do the same thing, I'll find that the folder I'm looking for was not found. Now this is a little bit frustrating because there are certain methods in the scripting runtime library that do allow wildcards in the file and folder paths. I've just popped up a few of the Microsoft Docs help pages here to demonstrate that a few of these do indeed allow wildcards. So copy file, you can include wildcard characters in the source path, likewise with copy folder as well. Similarly, delete file and delete folder, move file and move folder, but annoyingly, get folder and get file don't allow wildcards. So what can we do about that using the scripting runtime technique? One way that we could get this to work is to loop over all of the subfolders in this directory check if the name of that folder matches the pattern of text we're looking for, and then print out the details of that folder. To make this work, I'm going to declare another folder variable. I'll call this one subfol, and it will also be a scripting.folder class. And then I'm going to get a reference to this directory first. So I'm going to use my setFol equals fso.getFolder method. I'm just going to copy that and replace the change directory function with this line here to get a reference to c:\\. What I'd then like to do is loop over all of the subfolders in that folder. So I can say for each subfol in fol.subfolders. I'm going to close that loop off after my if statement. So I'm going to say next subfol at the end. What I'm then going to do is indent my if statement by highlighting all the lines in it and hitting the tab key. I'm not going to use an else clause for this particular if statement. I'm only going to print out some folder information if the name of the folder matches my pattern. And I also don't need to set a reference to another folder here. That's happening automatically in the for each loop. So I'm going to get rid of my set fol line. Then I'm going to replace the fso.folder exists. I'll take away that part and the open parentheses and then the close parentheses at the end. And the condition I want to check for is if subfol.name, and then I can use the like operator to compare the name of the subfolder with that pattern of text, including wildcard characters. Finally, I just want to update this part here where I'm printing out not the folder name anymore and the folder path, it's the subfolder name and the subfolder path. Having done all that, I'm going to clear the contents of the immediate window and then run this subroutine, and I'll find all of the folders in c:\/ that begin with the word wise. There are a few more there than I originally expected. Now what if we wanted to do the same thing using the directory function? To do that, let's head back down into that subroutine, and I'll start by declaring a new variable. I'll call this folName as string. After changing the directory, the first thing I'd like to do is say folName equals the result of that directory function. So looking for a folder called wise, followed by an asterisk within that current directory. Now, if that returns an empty string, I know that there are no folders that begin with the word wise. Otherwise, it's going to return some string, the name of the first matching folder. So at this point, I'm going to add a do until loop. I'm going to say do until folName equals an empty string. Then I'm just going to clear things up a little bit. In fact, I'm going to delete the entire if statement. Let's get rid of that entire thing. And then the first thing we'll do inside the loop is we'll say debug.print the current folder name. And then we'll simply say folName equals dir. So when you call the dir function without passing any parameters to it, it finds the next match for the initial call to the directory function. So this will just move on to the next folder matching that pattern. I'll close off my loop by writing the word loop and then just clear the contents of the immediate window. And then I can run that subroutine again and I get the same list of folder names. Just before we look at the copy file technique, it's probably worth mentioning a few other basic wildcard patterns you can use. So as well as sticking an asterisk at the end of the string, you can also stick one at the start. So for example, I could try to find folders that end with the word owl instead. So let's put the asterisk at the beginning followed by the word owl, and if I run that, I get silly owl and wise owl. And the same thing is true with the FileSystemObject technique as well. So I can say asterisk owl here, and that will do the same thing. I could also use wildcard characters, multiple wildcard characters, I should say. So let's say I wanted to find all the folders that contain the letter R. So if I say star, R, star, and then run that one, that will return, let's see, lots and lots of folders in there, lots of folders containing the letter R. You see plenty of those. And again, the same thing is true up here in the other example using the file system objects. That will return all the folders that have got a letter R in their name. Another wildcard character you can use is a question mark. So the asterisk character represents any number of characters, including no characters at all. If I were to type in a single question mark, so I'm going to type in the word wise again, followed by a space and then a single question mark. And if I type in a single question mark, that represents one single character. So I don't think I have any folders that begin with the word wise followed by a space with a single character. If I run this one, I don't get any additional folders printed out. But I do have several folders that have 3 characters in their last word. So there's rat, there's pig, there's owl. Let me just clear the contents of the immediate window to make this a little easier to see. So if I run this one, that's anything that begins with wise space followed by 3 characters. And again, the same thing is true for my other example up here using FileSystemObjects. If I run that, I get the same set of folders printed out there. For the next part of the video, I wanted a set of sample files and folders to work with. And rather than create those manually, I wrote some code to do it. Now, this isn't really part of what the original question was asking, so I'm not going to go through how to write this up. I'll go through the basics of what's happening, but I'll include a link in the video description so that you can download this code to generate the sample files yourself. Once you've downloaded it, you can right-click in your Project Explorer and choose Import File, and the one you want is called Create Sample Folders. I'll double-click to import that, and then double-click to open up the module. It relies on the FileSystemObject class, so you'll need a reference to the Scripting Runtime library, and everything that happens here is going to happen in the same folder that your current workbook is stored in. So providing you've saved this workbook in a settable folder, all of the subfolders will be generated in here. So it's going to generate a folder called Output Folder and another one called My Folders, and then within the My Folders directory, it's going to create currently 365 different subfolders. So I'm basically creating one folder for each day of the next year, including today's date. I'm doing that by storing the current date and then using the dateAdd function to add one more day to that date for each iteration of this loop. I'm then creating a new folder. So I'm generating a folder name and I'm including a formatted version of the date that I've calculated. It's not necessarily the most elegant date format to use if you want to store your date folders in chronological order. It's using the number of the day of the month and then the full name of the month of the year and then the 4-digit year. So it's not the ideal date format for folders, but that wasn't what I was really concerned about in this video. Then when it creates the folder, it also creates a random number of empty text files in that folder. So I've got the rand between function generating a number between 3 and 10, and then another loop in here that generates between 3 and 10 text files in each folder. And again, it renames those by using the format function to format the date. I've also got a couple of other subroutines in here to quickly clear the contents of the output folder. So these both assume that the output folder exists. They won't work if the folder doesn't exist. The first one uses FileSystemObjects to loop through the files collection of the folder and then apply the delete method to each one. And the other example uses the kill statement just to immediately remove all the files from that folder. So it's using wildcard characters again. So any file name with any file name extension. Use this with caution, please. So all I'm going to do at this point is head back up to the Create Folders and Files FSO subroutine and then hit the Run button. And once it's finished, if I look back in the same folder that this workbook is stored in, I've got an empty output folder and a My Folders folder with 365 folders, one for each day of the next year, sorted in a terrible way by number of the day of the month and then by month of the year, etc. But if I look into any one of those folders, I'll have a random number between 3 and 10 empty text files as well. So that's the data we're going to work with for the next little section. Okay, next I'll switch back to my original module by double-clicking on it, and I'm looking at the GetFolder name using the directory function here, so I'm going to use this one first to loop through all the folders matching a certain pattern in that set of folders I've just created. I'm going to change my change directory statement then first. I'm going to refer to this workbook.path and then concatenate to that \my folders. And then my folder name I'm going to capture using another pattern. I'm going to look for anything that happened in the month of March. So I'm going to change my string search pattern to say asterisk March asterisk. What I can then do is loop through the collection of folders matching that name. So I'll just clear the contents of the immediate window. And then if I run this subroutine, it should print out all the folders for the month of March in whichever year that happens to be. So there's some in 2022 and some in 2021 because I'm in the middle of March while I'm recording this video. We could do the same thing for the FileSystemObject example, but again, the get folder that we want to get isn't C:\\. I'm going to just copy and paste here this workbook.path and /my folders. Again, it's going to assume that this folder exists. If it doesn't exist, we run into the same problem we talked about earlier on in the video. So you might want to use the if folder exists method just to handle that possible problem. Again, the pattern I'm going to search for is going to be the same as the one I used in the directory function, so I'll just copy and paste that, clear the contents of the immediate window, and then run that subroutine, and we can see that we are indeed returning a list of different folders based on a partial folder name. Now I'd like to add some code to copy files from the folders we're looking at into the output folder. And I'm going to do this in a separate subroutine, so I'll give myself a bit of space at the bottom of the module and then create a new subroutine called copy files from folder. I want to be able to pass in the full path to the folder containing the files we want to copy. So I'm going to declare a parameter, I'll call it folder path as string, and then I'll use some scripting runtime techniques to do this. So I'll declare a couple of variables, dim fol as scripting.folder, and then dim f as scripting.file. The first thing I'll do is get a reference to the folder whose path I've passed in, so that's setFol equals fso.getFolder, and then reference the folder path that I've passed in to that parameter. I can then say for each f in fol.files, next f to close the loop, and inside that loop I can say f.copy and specify the destination to copy the file to. I'm going to refer to this workbook's path and then concatenate to that /output folder, so one of the two folders we created earlier. I'll include another / in that string and then concatenate the name of the file that I'm also looping over in this loop. So that's the basic procedure to copy files from the folder. Now I just need to call this subroutine from the other procedures that are looping through the folders with the matching names. To do this with the directory function or the dir function, we can nest this call inside the do until loop. So before we look for the next folder, we can say copy files from folder, and then we have to specify the full folder path. I can do this in a couple of ways. It's probably safest to construct this path again, just in case the current directory has been changed by any of our other code. So I'm just going to copy this workbook.path ampersand my folders. And then I'm going to concatenate to the end of that the current folder name. So I'll say ampersand fol name. I don't necessarily need to debug.print anything anymore, so I'm just going to comment that out temporarily, and then I can just clear the contents of the immediate window. Just checking that in my output folder at the moment there are no files. If I now run this get folder name looking for all the things that happened in March of any year on any day, if I run this subroutine and check in my output folder now, I've all of a sudden got all of my March sales files. Then we can try to do the same thing using our other subroutine, which is looping through these matching folder names. Let's just make a couple of small changes first. One thing I forgot to do earlier on, in fact, was modify the scope of my FSO variable. I'm just going to change the private to public, and the reason I'm doing that is because in my imported module, create sample folder, some of these subroutines reference an FSO, a file system object class. Now in the main routine, the one which creates all the folders and files, I've actually declared a local variable called FSO, so that works without any changes. Now that I've changed the scope of my variable in module 1, I don't technically need that variable anymore. This will still now work because it can just reference my auto-instancing variable from module number 1. The clear output folders using the FSO technique, however, I didn't declare a separate FSO variable in there. So in order for this one to work, this one does need to have the publicly scoped version of that variable in module 1. So having made that change back in module 1, all I need to do now is call my copy files method from within this loop. So I can say copy files from folder, and the folder whose files I want to copy is returned by referring to subfol.path. Let's add in the clear files or clear output folder FSO method call as well, so we get rid of all the existing files. And then let's update the month we're looking for as well. Let's go for April, just to make sure it's obviously different. So having done that, if I run the subroutine, we'll find, once again, our output folder is now full of all the files, but only from the folders matching the partial name that we've entered in that search string. So there we go, that's how to loop through a collection of folders even when you only have a partial folder name. A couple of different techniques to use. I guess you can pick your favourite. Hopefully that's enough to answer the original question. I think it is. If not, feel free to ask more questions about it. Otherwise, thanks for watching. See you next time.